Hello, parents and guardians, and welcome back to another Discipleship Debrief. So I am here to give you an update on what your students have been learning in youth group, or if your student has been missing, to give them the opportunity to stay up to date. So last night, we went through the end of Mark chapter 8. We are wrapping up Mark chapter 8, and we saw in verses 27 to 38, we saw Peter's confession of Jesus as Christ, and then we also saw Jesus' rebuke of Peter, and we saw the cost of discipleship discourse that Jesus performs. So we saw through this passage, first we saw Jesus ask two questions. He asked the disciples, what do others believe about me? What do the other people believe about me? And then he asked, what do you believe about me? And in asking, what do you believe about me? That's where we get what I called a mountaintop moment in Mark of Peter's confession of Jesus as the Christ. He says, you are the Christ. And even in Matthew's account, he says, the Son of the living God. So we talked about how we can see that from this point on, the disciples do understand who Jesus is, but they still don't understand what he will do. So they kind of have that half vision, even that we talked about with the blind man a few weeks ago. So they can see who Jesus is. And so this is a very monumental moment in the book. But immediately after that, immediately after Peter's confession of him, Jesus then starts teaching them, and he teaches them what he has to do, what the work of the Messiah actually is. And he explains the cross and the plan of redemption, and Peter rebukes him. And in Jesus' response to Peter's rebuke, Jesus actually tells Peter, get behind me, Satan. So he calls Peter Satan. And we talked about that. We talked about how a lot of people have questions about that passage of, is Peter being possessed in that moment? Does Peter not have the Holy Spirit, and then makes it open for Satan to be able to possess him in this way? Is Satan actually speaking through Peter, and that's what Jesus recognizes? And personally, I don't think so. In my study, I didn't see anything like that. I think that the truth is far simpler and far more convicting, and that being that Peter, well-intentioned or not, is speaking against the plan of redemption and against God's sovereign will, ultimately. And speaking against God means speaking for Satan. There is no middle kingdom. There is no gray area. Sin is the realm of Satan. And if we are speaking in sin, we are speaking for Satan. And we talked about that. And I'm sure some of your students who were there came home slightly bummed because of that. And then to close, we talked about the cost of discipleship and what it truly costs to follow Jesus, and how everything he mentioned was centered on just the idea of self-denial. So for Jesus, the central theme of what it means to be a follower of his is self-denial, self-sacrifice. So that is broad scale what we talked about. I would advise for follow-up, I would definitely advise rereading this passage. There's a ton to go over, so feel free to even talk amongst the passage as just the parent or guardian and disciple them through that. And some questions to follow up with. I've got two for you this time because there were so many topics touched upon. One is going to be more just thoughtful, thought-provoking, and the other one is going to be self-assessment. So the first, in light of what Jesus asks the disciples at the start of the passage, I would ask your student, what do other people think about Christ? What do people at your school think about Christ? What do people in your family, if you have family members with different views about Christ, what do they think? If you have a friend who is a different religion, what do they think about Christ? And that will help them in knowing what others think about Christ. We talked about how it's good to know what other people think about Christ. It's equipping for us if we know what other people think about Christ, because ultimately he is the center of our faith. And for other people, you cannot be wrong about Christ and be right about anything else. You can't be wrong about Christ and be right about the path to heaven. So it's important that we know how to broach these conversations specifically about the character of Christ. So ask your student that. And for the self-assessment, ask your student, do you understand the cost of discipleship as laid out in this passage? by Jesus himself. Do you understand the cost of discipleship, and are you paying it? And again, this is tough. Do you understand that Jesus is calling for self-sacrifice, and are you accommodating that? Right? Are you sacrificing a little bit of time on a Friday evening or a Saturday evening so that your Sunday evening is clear and you can participate with the youth? Are you having awkward conversations with friends at school for the name of Christ, sacrificing social comfort for the name of Christ that your friend may know? These are the questions you need to ask your student. Do they understand the self-sacrifice aspect of discipleship? And help them to meet it. You will know your student better than I will. If you see them refusing self-sacrifice, please feel free to call them on it. And if they complain, send them my way. So that is all I have for you parents this week. Please, if you ever have any questions, anything like that, please reach out. Otherwise, we'll see you next time.